golden anniversary of Muhammad Ali, Joe Frazier 3, the Thrilla in Manila in October of 1975. I am merely the somewhat capable host, TJ Rives. Our insider is Big Dan Rafael. I don't have to twist your arm to get nostalgic with me. You're all about this coming up in a couple of moments, right? You're ready to
Absolutely.
go.
I mean, we talk about old fights all the time. I mean, as much as we love the new fights, they create the memories that become the old fights that we talk about.
That's right. And guess what? We hopefully are going to live for a while longer, and all the fights we've been talking about for all these years in the recent, they're going to become the old nostalgic fights sooner rather than later, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, or dare we even say if you get to 50 years beyond, like with this one. So again, on the pod feed, thank you for finding us.
I don't know if either one of us are getting to the 100th anniversary of the Thrilla Manila.
I,
That'll
I
put
don't
us over
know
100 years
that
old.
you know if we're in the home and again we're both toothless and fighting and jousting as I like to say with the plastic silverware, we might be breaking down
We're
the
going to be
Thrilla Manila
105.
on the yeah, I mean who
I
knows.
don't think we're living that
I
long.
don't know. We'll see. But anyway, thank you for finding us on the pod feed on Apple, Spreaker, Spotify. Now, we should also say that the video where we're talking the nostalgia, the video was up on the YouTube page, and hopefully you found that earlier in the evening on Sunday for the Thrill in Manila and talking Ali and the greatness of Ali and the final fight with Frazier and the end of his career. So go find the YouTube page as well. We love it with all the content. And again, there'll be some better fights coming along, but we decided to be nostalgic for tonight. So let's get to it. Let's get to October 1st, 1975, what was actually a late morning fight in Manila in the Philippines, back in the evening prime time in the United States, closed circuit days where they were using, as we've often talked about, movie theaters that had didn't have a lot of crowd in them early in the week. They would rent out a bunch of movie theaters. They would have ballrooms at hotels, different locales to go watch the closed circuit of this fight. And it's the third fight in the trilogy of Ali and Frazier. So Dan set it up here because Frazier had won the first one. Ali had won a non-title rematch, and at the time here, this is Ali coming off the monumental upset of the seemingly unbeatable George Foreman in Zaire, Africa, the year before. All right, set us up more on the trilogy fight here that became the Thrilla in Manila.
Well, first thing you mentioned about the timing of the fight that they did it in the late morning in the Philippines. Bob Arum from Top Rank was the promoter of this fight, and I've talked to Bob about this in the past. And the reason, as you mentioned, was because of the fact that they wanted it for the primary market, which is where the money was, which was the United States of America for closed circuit purposes. And so, what I guess they didn't realize is that the arena where they held this fight at the time, the Arionette Arena, which is still in existence and they've still used for events and they've boxing and all that, among other things, didn't have air conditioning. And it happened that it was at the time of day where it was going to become the hottest. And so Bob has said to me about just how sweltering it was, and you could tell by the amount of exertion and just the when you watch the fight, and just it's a savage fight. Think about under any circumstances how brutal it is, but now think about it if it's way above the level of temperature that you'd be used to. Was probably 100 degrees in the ring because
Oh,
of
over that because
and the lighting from the TV and all that.
It
Oh,
was over a 90-degree day, as the story goes. And again, this facility seated over 25,000 people. So now you pack all the people in, breathing in all the air.
oh yeah,
You cut the hot TV lights on, and it was easily probably over 105 degrees and maybe closer to
easy.
115 degrees
So
in that ring for these
Bob
guys
talks
pounding each
about
other.
that.
Continue. Yeah.
Bob talks about that when he says it. As far as setting up, well, the reason why people say, well, all these fights, Thrilla and Manila's in the Philippines. You had obviously the Rumble in the Jungle with Foreman took place in Zaire. When George fought Frazier and won the title, took place in Jamaica. That's because these governments were paying big site fees to bring the event there. That was no different in terms of Manila with the Marcos government to try to bring a positive light to the Philippines. It's not dissimilar to what we see with what goes on with the Saudi Arabian events these days. So Arum and Ali and Frazier went there to do this fight. Uh, you mentioned that he had defeated in a massive upset in October of 1974 to win the Rumble in the Jungle to regain the heavyweight championship against George Foreman, a monumental upset. He defended the title after that. He fought Chuck Wepner in the famous fight that became the basis for Sylvester Stallone's idea for the Rocky movie. He beat the noted puncher Ron Lyle. He beat Joe Bugner, who was a longtime contender. And then in October of 76, he fought this fight with Joe Frazier. So he had all those fights over that period of time. It was only 1 year, basically a year where he had the 3 fights. I mean, that was the time when guys were active. In terms of Joe Frazier, you mentioned that he'd won the first fight, the fight of the century, lost the second fight, which was not for the world title, was like for the NABF title or regional type title. But he had lost the second fight to Ali. This was in January of '74. He then had fought twice since then. He had a knockout of Jerry Quarry, a longtime contender. He had a knockout of Jimmy Ellis, and that set him up for this third fight against Muhammad Ali. After Ali fought for years after this third fight. Frazier only fought 2 more times after this. He had the rematch with George Foreman that he got clobbered in once again, and then he was off for 5 years, and then he came back and got a draw against the legendary Jumbo Cummings, who you probably
right,
never heard of.
Nondescript, right.
But on the night that Ali and Frazier met for the third time in the ring, I mean, it goes down as arguably one of the, if not the greatest fight of all time. I mean, we can quarrel and discuss about, certain action fights if you're partial to some of the lighter weights, like Chico Corrales against Jose Luis Castillo, or, any number of the smaller weight fights. There's plenty of them. But in terms of the historical relevance, because of the heavyweight championship being at stake in this fight, the names associated because of the legendary status of Ali and Frazier, sort of the unusual location where the fight took place for that, you add that all together, and it was obviously a different time for boxing. It's still front page news at the time.
I was going right there. You have to understand how big a deal this was worldwide, not just in the United States, that the heavyweight champion of the world being Muhammad Ali, he had fought all over the globe. He had fought in Africa. He had also fought in Europe a couple of times, in England and in Germany.
He had fought in Malaysia.
He had fought all over the place besides just the United States. Globally, it's arguable, but probably he was the most famous athlete in the world for the better part of about a decade during this time frame. Everybody knew who he was. Yeah.
So the first fight that they had was a great fight. These guys, Joe Frazier was at his, I guess in his prime, had the knockdown, won the title, or won the lineal title, was already the champion. I was at a time where Ali was, had been forced into his time off because he didn't go into the Vietnam War and accept his induction into the army. So he got suspended, eventually worked his way back to the fight. It became the mega event of one of the mega sports events of the 20th century. And so it was the champion undefeated against the guy with the lineal title, the claim to the title undefeated. And it was a massive event and a great fight. By the time they got to, so then the second fight happened, which I said, that's the kind of the forgettable fight of the trilogy. Was not a spectacular fight by any stretch of the imagination. Now we get to the third fight.
It was only a 12-round fight too, by the way. By schedule, it only went 12, the distance. And then you had this one. Then you got to this one.
Right. So the difference here is that by the time they get to the third fight, both guys are still obviously really good, but they're degraded at that point. They can't move as well. They didn't have the similar athleticism that they still had when they fought for the first time or even for the second time. And when that happens, and I've seen this in other fights that I've covered, guys have big hearts, that didn't change, and guys can still punch, that didn't change. But when you can't move as well, you're kind of forced to stand in front of the guy, and you can't get away from the punches, and it makes it for a much more sort of grinding, grueling physical fight. So this third fight was way more punishing and way more destructive and took so much more out of these guys than the previous 2 fights. That it was just something to behold. I mean, the punishment that these 2 guys inflicted on each other is there are really not words to describe it. And Ali did it the best he could. At some points, he talked about it was the closest to death he could ever have imagined. And if you want to talk about the accolades that the fight rang up, and it's obviously you can find it on YouTube or anywhere. It's just an amazing fight to watch. This goes without saying. It was the fight of the year for 1975 by pretty much everybody, Ring Magazine, you name it. In the mid-90s, I went and looked this up because I knew we were going to be talking about this. In 1996, the Ring Magazine did its, I guess, top 50 or top 100 fights or whatever of all time. This was ranked as the #1 fight of all time. Now, do you remember the old Sports Century series on ESPN?
Right. In 1999. Right.
Yes. So they were going reviewing the 20th century. This was named not just for boxing, for all sports. This was named as the 5th greatest sporting event of the 20th century.
Wow.
So that just sort of explains to you the level of beyond just a boxing match that this was.
Well, and again, the magnitude is massive. The fact that Ali has beaten Foreman, who had destroyed Frazier. Now, interestingly, when you go back and watch the fight, and I have gone back and I've seen the fight a couple of times. Again, I was a little TJ, you were a little Rafael when this was live. But when you go back and watch the fight, Ali was really in control at the beginning of the fight. The hand speed, the footwork, but like you mentioned, Father Time is catching up with both of them. He was not going to be able to sustain that, and it became more of a slugfest. It became more of a brawl, and that's when Frazier in the fifth round rocks him with the left hook, and the crowd is oohing and eyeing and cheering, and it's like, okay, now the fight is on. And then Rayfield, they proceed to beat on each other
Oh yeah.
and beat on each other for another 8 or 9 rounds until the high drama comes in the 12th, the 13th, and the 14th round, the championship rounds of this 15-round fight.
It was just a battle of attrition. It was not. I mean, I guess that maybe it would have gone the distance, but they had so little left at the end. I mean, if you fast forward to the end of the fight where it stopped at the end of the 14th round, where Eddie Futch, the late great trainer, Hall of Fame trainer for Joe Frazier, matching up against another all-time great trainer in Angelo Dundee for Muhammad Ali, he would not let Joe come off the stool for round number 15. And it was close where maybe they weren't going to let Ali maybe not come out for the 15th round. I mean, both these guys were spent. And, Futch, decided that was enough. Joe's eyes were messed up. He could barely see. Ali obviously was feeling the pain also. This was, we always think about in a boxing match, and I think about this all the time. You see the guy who wins, they raise their hand and he wins the fight. And obviously you see the loser. Obviously, if it's a very hard, tough fight, you're like, oh, he took a real punishment in that fight. He lost the fight. The guy who won often takes just as much punishment as the guy that loses. It's just that he happens to get his hand raised. But what people, I think, a lot of times in this sport forget, fans and otherwise, is that the guy that wins often is just as damaged as the guy who loses. He just happened to be the guy to get the victory, whether by points or maybe gets a knockout. In this particular case, a knockout that was maybe a moment away from it going the other way, where maybe neither one of the guys would have been able to come out and finish the fight. Then you get yourself a technical draw, I guess.
So Ali in the 13th round, there's a famous, exchange, and you've seen highlights of it. He blasts Foreman with a couple of big right hands and knocks his mouthpiece out, has him hurt. And that's the point in time, because I saw an interview with Eddie Futch where he was talking about it, where Eddie became very concerned.
Well, he was almost blind. Joe was almost blind.
And so this is what I was coming to. It was later revealed by Frazier in his book that he was legally blind, I believe, in the right eye at this point in time. How they got this past boxing commissions and doctors or whatever tactic they used. But
it was the Philippines.
Now his left eye is swelling shut with Ali blasting him in the 13th round and the 14th round. And in Futch's interview that I remember seeing somewhere, he said, I had a blind fighter that could not see, and I was not sending him out there again to take more punishment and maybe get killed when he could not see. So it's just amazing that Foreman was able, I'm sorry, that Frazier was able to hang in a 12th round, a 13th round in that sweltering situation without basically being able to see Ali as he's pounding him.
Joe was, I don't know if this was part of Eddie Futch's reasoning for pulling Joe out of the fight, but he was losing the fight going into that 14th round. So I mean, obviously he probably had an inkling that his guy was down. If he had been up big, maybe he lets it go because if he can take 3 more minutes of punishment, he's going to win the fight. But it was not the case.
But I mean, they stopped the fight and they immediately cut over to Ali, and you hear the legendary play-by-play man on the closed circuit, Don Dunphy, going, I think they're stopping the fight. And they see Ali stand up and he says, Ali has won the fight. And Ali puts his arms up for a second and then walks to the middle of the ring and sits down and then eventually lays down in the middle of the ring, just exhausted and dehydrated. He reportedly lost like 7 pounds during the fight in water weight. It was crazy what they put themselves through.
It was like they said about being as near death as one could imagine. And remember, going into the fight, what made it so important for the public, for the fans, is that they had the history of the rivalry. The first 2 fights, so obviously, were 1-1. They were both superstar heavyweight champions. Had been, Frazier had been the champion. They had some harsh words with each other. They had, got into the physical altercation on Wide World of Sports, for example.
With Howard Cosell, yes.
So they had a lot of, well, really not both of them. It was really Ali that had the bad word to say about Joe Frazier, which hurt him very deeply, even if Ali claims he didn't really mean it that way, but, as more of a promotional thing. But, they had a very complicated relationship beyond the
Well,
ring.
very famously, Ali's at one of the press conferences and pulls out a rubber toy gorilla, and he starts doing his riff of, I'm going to show you that it's going to be a thriller when I pound the gorilla in Manila. And he starts hitting the rubber gorilla right next to Frazier.
What he
And
actually said
Frazier
was,
and Frazier's ready to fight him at the press conference
I
over
have the
doing it.
exact quote, TJ. It's going to be a thriller and a chilla and a killer when I get the gorilla in Manila.
And he's pounding on
Yes.
the rubber gorilla, holding it in his hand right next to Frazier, who's ready to fight him there again after they had fought in the New York studio for ABC on Howard Cosell's show. So there was bad blood.
And
And
what made it so amazing, though, is
yeah,
that these are heavyweights who had all-time uh, ability to take punishment, who had gargantuan hearts, who weren't going to give an inch, and you had to impose yourself on each other, and that's what they did for this fight. And again,
again,
because they weren't what they were at their best, they kind of couldn't get out of the way, and they just had to rely more on their heart than on their skills at this point of their careers.
and again, we can't say enough the magnitude that this is front page news worldwide that Ali has won this fight. It's the lead story on the national news. Remember, there's no internet, there's no cable TV, the cell phone doesn't exist. This was such a big deal that Ali had won this fight on the heels of beating Foreman the year before. For the legacy and for the all time.
And
But now the important thing in the nostalgia is this wasn't the end of the career of either guy, as you were making. Ali fought a
so,
bunch
yeah, I
after
mean,
this.
in a perfect world, both these guys probably should have called it a day when this was over. Obviously, it's boxing, that wasn't going to happen. So this was, like I said, October 75. Joe was taking a very bad beating in this fight. He retires, or, Eddie Futch pulls him out after round 14. Less than 8 months later, June of 76, he comes back and he has a rematch, not for the world title. This is a regional title fight. He has the rematch with George Foreman. Remember, he comes in with the he's wearing the robe, but he's got the hood up, and when he pulls the hood off, shows that he's shaved his head bald. It was a kind of a shock to everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And George Foreman knocked him down a couple of times and stopped him in the 5th round. So obviously got the 2 knockout victories. And as I mentioned, then he was pretty much done for that time. And then that was 76. And then at the end of 1981, he came out of retirement for a singular fight against Jumbo Cummings, fought him to a draw in a 10-rounder, and then never fought again. Now, so in essence, the Ali third fight ended Joe's career, with the, let's call it the coda of the
Right. For all
fight.
intents and purposes,
Yeah.
that was the end of it.
Now with Ali, totally different ballgame. So he's still the champion because he retained the title because that he had won back from Foreman in 74. He fights Frazier in the third fight in now the amount of punishment he takes in October of 1975. He was back in action in February of 1976. I mean, he took off just a few months. He fought in Puerto Rico when he had a fight against Jean-Pierre Coupin, who he knocked out. So he was very active after that. He went on and actually had some of his biggest fights, biggest wins, and a lot of, added a lot of money
Fought
to the
Ken
bank account.
Norton at Yankee Stadium in
Well, even
1976.
before that,
Right,
so
right.
after Koopman, he had the Jimmy Young fight. He fought Richard Dunn in Munich. You mentioned he fought all over the place. He went to Europe for that fight. Then he had the 76 fight. This was at Yankee Stadium, the third fight with Kenny Norton. That was a controversial decision that Ali won to retain the title. They had split 2 previous fights. Norton was always style-wise a pain in the neck for Ali to deal with, and he had another big problem with him on that night in September of 76 in the third fight. And if you talk to Bob Arum, who was the promoter for that fight also, he'll tell you that it was after as much punishment as Ali took against Frazier in the Manila fight. I've talked to Bob in the past, and he said to me, after the 76 third fight with Kenny Norton, that's when he felt that Ali should have retired because he could tell that was the night where it struck Arum, who promoted, by the way, like 27 of Muhammad Ali's fights. He knew him extremely well. They were together for a long time and maintained a relationship even long after his retirement, to the point where now he promotes his grandson, Nico Ali Walsh. In any event, it was after the fight with Norton where Bob thought that should have been the end for Muhammad, but he was still the heavyweight champion, and of course he continued to fight. He fought Alfredo Evangelista late in 1977. He fought Ernie Shavers again for another time in 1977, and then he matched up with Leon Spinks in February of 1978. Obviously, that became one of the famous upsets of all time. Ali is the long reigning champion. People maybe are blinded to think that he's still got it because he's been on a run of continual defenses. Spinks is 6-0-1, had won the Olympic gold medal, but had a draw on his record. And, if they made that kind of match today, people would go absolutely Looney Tunes.
Right.
But
Stunning. It
they
was
made that
stunning.
fight.
It was stunning that he beat him. And again, that was an interesting time frame because Ali, another factor here, Ali was in need of money, and that's well
Yeah, yeah,
known. He talked
yeah.
about it. He wrote about it in his book. And so he was still fighting frequently because of the money. And there was some money because of the Spinks name of being an Olympic champion, etc. And it's people don't realize how regularly he fought after the Frazier fight before
Yeah,
we
yeah.
get to Larry Holmes coming up. But he did. He fought a bunch.
So, but he obviously lost that fight to Spinks, one of the greatest upsets in boxing history, and he's certainly in the heavyweight division. And Leon Spinks became as much fame and notoriety as the top amateurs had back at the time, the 1976 Olympic team with Leon Spinks, with his brother Michael Spinks, with Sugar Ray Leonard. They became household names, but he became even bigger in terms of what his profile was after he had the split decision over Ali to win the title. And then, of course, later in 1978, 8 months later, or whatever it was, he lost in the giant rematch in New Orleans.
And the record-breaking night in the Superdome. All right, so I'm going to hit you with a little fun trivia.
And by the way,
this.
that was at that moment that seemed to be the end of Ali, that he was going to be done.
Right, right. But how about when he fought Spinks in the first fight? To give you an idea of the magnitude of the interest, that was a weeknight in Las Vegas, and they televised it live on CBS. CBS bid for the fight, CBS television. Brent Musburger called the fight that night. At that point, Ferdy Pacheco, the fight doctor, had decided, I'm not going to be involved with Ali anymore. I think he should retire, but he was on the broadcast.
Which is good because Ferdy Pacheco was a horrible announcer.
Well, okay, but the fight doctor's there. All right. CBS had 43 million people watch that night. So again, different era, fewer channels. Ali was that big of a deal. Rafael, we've talked about this before. Do you remember for the rematch later in September in New Orleans, the TV audience, how many people watched the Ali Spinks?
It was like 70 million or something like that. It was
try 90, brother. Yeah. 90 million people.
Yeah, because people had 3 channels and it was a massive
That's
event.
right. But the magnitude of Ali trying to get the heavyweight title back once more, avenge the loss to Spinks.
It was on the level of a Super Bowl. I mean,
we can't fathom that today 5 million people will watch a fight anymore.
In today's day, the Super Bowl does like 100 million people for the broadcast. 103 million, 104 million. Right. This was not quite that much, and obviously it's also decades ago, so there's fewer people in the United States at that point. But yeah, so it did like a Super Bowl level number. Like
in the present day, you would kill to get 5 million people to watch.
Go look up and see what did the Super Bowl broadcast in like 1978 or 1979.
Oh, this was more than it. This was more than it on a Sunday afternoon by far. I'm sure than the Steelers and the Cowboys.
But was the Super Bowl back at night back then?
No, the Super Bowl was in the daytime back in the they would play it in the afternoon, the late afternoon, and this was just on a different level. That win over Foreman in Africa, the win in the Thrilla Manila that we're talking about right now for this, just launched Ali even more into the lore and the fight fans and the magnitude of it, that 90 million people watched the Spinks fight. And then just one more time, he retired after that night, but then came out of the retirement, and the anniversary of that fight is this week, also right at the same time as the Thrilla in Manila, as he fought Larry Holmes coming out of retirement.
Yeah, that should never have happened. I mean, Larry Holmes was in like a no-win situation. He was always in the shadow of Ali, even though he was becoming a great champion in his own right at that time. And it's like in boxing, it happens on a regular basis. It's the rite of passage. It's the passing of the baton. He had sparred with Muhammad Ali. He had been on undercards of his. And now he had to fight him. I don't think he reveled in it. He's talked about it. And if you go back, you can find any number of comments from Larry Holmes through the years that, he didn't want to hurt Muhammad Ali or do any kind of damage to him. And for whatever reason, Ali took that fight. He got absolutely destroyed.
Money again. Money
probably.
Was part of it. And it was obvious that night, because you go back and watch that fight, Ali had nothing like in the second round. And the fight went on. It went on and on with Holmes just beating on him. And finally they stopped the fight.
Angelo Dundee finally stopped it after the 10th round. And,
sad.
And then as sick as that beatdown was, a year later, Ali fought again, 14 months later. That was the fight against Trevor Berbick in Nassau, the Bahamas, which was ultimately the final fight of his career. But, he could have walked away after the Manila fight and That would have been good. He certainly could have walked away after regaining the title against Spinks in the rematch. But, like every fighter, he wanted to keep going and make the money, like you said. And, they took the beatings against Holmes. He didn't really take a beating against Berbick. He actually didn't look that horrible against Berbick, as crazy as it sounds. But those two fights probably should never have happened. But the Thrilla in Manila, again, my opinion, took so much out of Ali, took so much out of Frazier that should have been. It was a great. I mean, it is an unbelievable fight. It's just mesmerizing type of battle.
Especially when you take all the factors into account of the scorching heat and the fact that Frazier basically could not see in the
and the
last couple
rivalry.
of rounds of the fight. Yeah, and the hatred these two guys had for each other all throughout their careers and even post careers. So great nostalgia here for this, sharing the time on it. It's wild that the anniversary of the two fights of the Thrill in Manila and then Holmes destroying Ali are within what, a day of each other. So it's 5 years apart. Crazy, crazy on that. Listen, great stuff. Always love doing the nostalgic thing.
By the way, I may say also, it may be a few days between those two fights, but Ali fought in that same time frame because the Kenny Norton fight was on September 28th, so a few days earlier. That's the Yankee Stadium fight we were talking
what's
about.
the date on the Spinks revenge fight in September of '78? It's somewhere
September.
around
That was September 15th.
September 15th. So
And even
always in the
September
fall.
29th of 1977, that was the Ernie Shavers fight that he had in
Wow.
defending the title. So he was keeping to that sort of, I guess, I don't know if it was on purpose,
The
but
greatest did not shy away from fighting anybody. He fought everybody seemingly in his era, including this epic fight with Joe Frazier. All right,
well, I
nostalgic.
ask you, I mean, is there a single heavyweight of consequence in that time frame from like say the late 60s through like to like 1980ish, 19 like late 70s that he didn't fight? No, the answer is no.
No.
He fought everybody. And
Yes.
that's one of the and he
And he
beat most of them.
beat them.
Yeah.
He beat almost all of
And even
them.
if he lost to like, Frazier, he
Well,
certainly
because
avenged it.
Berbick and Holmes, the last two, are the only two he didn't avenge. He obviously avenged the Frazier loss. He avenged the Norton loss
But
earlier
I
in
would
his career.
consider,
So, and the Spinks
even though
loss.
he fought Holmes and Berbick, I mean, not that Berbick became a great fighter, but I would consider them to not even really be truly of his era. They were like of the next era.
Yes, I would agree with
And
that.
the interesting thing, and I wrote about this back in the day when I was at ESPN, when Trevor Berbick was killed, that he is the bridge, if you will, between the two eras because he retired Ali and lost the title to Tyson.
Yep.
So that's the bridge between those two great fighters and those eras of boxing.